Welcome back to 80K Talks, where we share the stories, people, and the places that make the Adirondacks unforgettable. I'm Jane, your host for 80K Talks. My co-host and brother Steve, unfortunately, is stuck in traffic on the Northway, so it's just, listener, you've just got me today. And if you've spent any time on Adirondack waters, you've probably seen someone gliding silently across the surface in a sleek, ultralight canoe that looks almost too easy to carry. That's probably a Hornbeck. For more than 5 decades, Hornbeck Boats has been synonymous with innovation, craftsmanship, and the Adirondack tradition of pack canoeing. Today, we're joined by Josh Trombley, who now leads Hornbeck Boats after the passing of its legendary founder, Pete Hornbeck. And we'll talk a bit about Pete today and the legacy he left behind. We'll talk about his vision and what makes these boats so unique, and how Hornbeck continues to shape the way people explore wilderness lakes and ponds, not just here in the Adirondacks, but across the country. Whether you're a seasoned paddler or you've never stepped into a canoe before, you'll hear stories that connect history, craftsmanship, with a deep sense of freedom that comes with paddling a boat you can lift with one hand. So grab your paddle or at least a cup of coffee and settle in. This is a conversation about more than just boats. It's about legacy, adventure, and what it means to belong to the water. So Josh, I know that was a bit of a preamble, but welcome to 80K Talks.
Thank you for having me. It's great to be here today.
Well, listener, what you don't know is Josh is on his way to Minnesota and he's stopped at a rest stop. This is a first for 80K Talks and probably a first for you, but we're super happy you could make time in your schedule to talk to us.
Of course. Thank you.
So, Josh, let's start with maybe the origin story of Hornbeck Boats. How did Pete Hornbeck's vision shape the company?
Sure. So Hornbeck Boats, really, it started in the early 70s. Pete and Ann had moved from Buffalo to the Adirondacks to a piece of property they bought and moved there in 71, I believe, and just kind of started going things. So Pete was a paddler and he wanted to build his own boat. At that point in time, he was a kayaker. He would do whitewater kayaking. And he found a company in the UK that he reached out to and said, I want to buy a mold from you so I can build my own boats. And they said, we don't know how to sell a mold. And he said, I don't know how to buy one. Let's figure it out. And so they went and they picked it up. I believe it was in Boston that it came over shipped to, and they brought it back. And he started building fiberglass whitewater kayaks in the backyard of their house. And he'd throw them on the front lawn with a for sale sign and sell a few of them here and there. And they would, as he'd say it, they would paddle them on Saturdays and repair them on Sundays. So a few years later, we're talking right around probably 1975, he met a gentleman that was, well, I've heard the story 2 different ways from Pete. The first story is he met a gentleman who was paddling a fiberglass pack boat that was designed by Bart Hathaway and built by Old Town called the Rushton. And Pete checked it out and thought it was pretty cool. And the other story is that Pete went to the Adirondack Museum and saw the Rushtons there at the museum and thought, what if I built something like that? And I think that it's a combination of the two.
Okay.
That's what truly happened. So he wanted to design and build one. And he needed to build one that was a little bit bigger because he was a little bigger. So he started building it and people started buying them, and it just evolved over the years. And that's kind of where it started and grew from.
That's great. I was just at the Adirondack Museum earlier this summer, and they've been listener, if you haven't been, you really need to visit it. It's a wonderful facility in Blue Mountain Lake, and they have an entire building devoted to boats. And at the very end, it talks about all the evolution of the guide boat and canoes, the history. And then at the end, it ends with a Hornbeck because it's sort of like the next gen water. What's the correct term for it? Is it pack canoe or
it's a pack boat. It's a pack boat because it's not really a canoe. It's not really a kayak. It's kind of in between. And it's something that's, at its core, very Adirondack.
Right. It's canoe-shaped. Let's put it that way.
Yes.
So imagine it like that. How did it grow from there? So we decided to build this kind of vessel When did it turn into, was it a business at that point, or was it just a hobby?
No, not really. I mean, I can argue that it was always a hobby for Peter Hornbeck. Um, no, it was at that point. It was just kind of him building them for people in Olmstedville, the town where they lived, and friends, and then kind of word of mouth would spread, and somebody else would want to be interested in one. He really liked the idea of the pack boat because he didn't like having to. He was tall and thin. He had long legs like me, and getting himself into the cockpit of a kayak wasn't
Right.
something he really enjoyed. So being able to have the open boat, but sit on the bottom and use the double blade paddle was something that was really intriguing to him. And the more he used it, the more he liked it.
Right.
And yeah.
So it's sort of like it has the advantages of, using the double-sided paddle like a kayak and by yourself, but is open on top like a traditional canoe.
Yeah. It looks like a canoe and it functions similar to a kayak, and it kind of gets a little bit of the pros of both worlds. It's a boat that fits a lot of uses, but I mean, there's different boats for different purposes, and the pack boat doesn't cover all of them, but it
Right.
works for a great deal of them, especially people that want to have a lightweight craft that they can just throw on their shoulder and take off
Right.
into the woods.
So speaking of lightweight, what are these boats constructed out of?
Today, they're built out of Kevlar. We build almost primarily out of Kevlar. We like the performance of that material, the abrasion resistance and the impact resistance gives us the mechanicals we want to build a long-lasting boat.
So when he constructed the first one, what did he construct it out of? Wood?
It was fiberglass.
Fiberglass,
So
sorry.
Kevlar was around, but it wasn't really common at that point in time. Kevlar was invented, I think, in like 68, and he built his first Hornbeck in 75. It was around, he told me, 78, 79 that he and a buddy got their hands on some Kevlar. He was a school teacher down in Johnsburg, and they rolled the Kevlar out in the gym, cut it in half. Each of them rolled back up their half and went home and built their things. And so he built his first Lost Pond
Wow.
from Kevlar. And at that point, it was like, I'm never going back. This is lighter. It's more durable, and I don't itch after working with it the way that I do with fiberglass.
Wow.
So,
This is okay. Steve and I always joke that this is the Tangent podcast, but this is about the fifth time. This is about the fifth time I've heard about something in the Adirondacks that originated or has roots connected to the Johnsburg School. It just everything
really?
from musicians, opera performer. It always boggles my mind. I'm like, because I know where the Johnsburg School is.
Sure.
There must be something magical about that place that has a little bit of white lightning in it. But anyways, so now he's sort of innovated and invented something that's different on the marketplace. How did he build the business? What was the demand like?
The business really just kind of built organically. I mean,
Right.
this was the, mid late 70s. There wasn't an internet. There wasn't really any way of really spreading the word of what his boats were. It was just kind of word of mouth. People would see somebody else throwing this tiny little boat on their shoulder and carrying it off into the woods. And they'd say, how did you do that? Where'd you get that? What is that? And then they would
Right.
reach out and talk to him. And so it just it grew organically, I'd say through probably the mid 80s before he really started putting a lot more time into the business and trying to grow it, doing much more advertising. He would advertise in fishing magazines and in Adirondack Life and Adirondack Explorer, and people would find him that way.
You've talked a lot about how the Hornbeck is different from a canoe or kayak. Is there anything like a Hornbeck, or is, an alternative that people might be aware of, or is it a unicorn?
Sure. No, we're by no means a unicorn. The modern pack boat really, I mean, pack boats have been around for hundreds of years. I mean, you could
Right.
make the argument that a dugout log that was used as a boat with a double bladed paddle is effectively a pack boat. There's evidence of Inuits building birch bark pack boats.
Right.
But the modern pack boat really was the late 1800s by John Henry Rushton,
Okay.
where he was building little cedar strip boats for a writer and adventurer named who went by the pen name Nessmuk, George Washington Sears. And he was a little guy,
Hmm.
I believe like 5'1", 110 pounds when he was healthy. And he wanted to go off into the woods in the northern forest, and he didn't want to pay a guide. So he had Rushton build him a pack boat, and that's where it came from. So, Pete was inspired by that. But as I think I already mentioned, Bart Hathaway, who was a boat designer, I believe out of Massachusetts somewhere, had designed one for Old Town that they built for a couple of years, but they didn't really know what to do with it. It didn't really fit their, product line. So they
Hmm.
mothballed it. And then since, Pete is arguably the, the central point where all the other pack boats have kind of spread out from that point now in composites. But there's other various ones that have popped up in the Adirondacks. There's some, that have popped up. There's Canadian brands that do it. There's the pack boat has become it's still a very niche, and it's still very focused on the northeast part of the US and specifically the Adirondacks, especially.
Mm.
But it is growing in popularity in many places.
Great. And we'll talk about that in a minute, because that's also impacted your business too. Are you giving it with the ultralight performance, or is there a trade-off for durability?
Well, the boats are quite durable. They're not fragile, but
Okay,
they are
great.
not indestructible. They're
Great.
definitely not indestructible. So it's not as if this is a, ABS or plastic type kayak that you can just drag and hammer against things. If you're looking to do whitewater kayaking, well, that's going to be an ABS boat is going to work much better for you. It's
Right.
going to be heavier, but you're not worried about the plastic, really taking on much in the way of damage. The primary thing that you'll see on composite boats in general is, you're going to scratch the boat, and different brands deal with that different ways. Some use gel coats with a white or off-white bottom of the hull, which when it scratches, the scratches blend in and they don't show.
Mm.
We don't use a gel coat. Gel coats tend to add weight or add significant weight. So we're trying to stay as light as possible. So you'll see the scratches, the bottom of the hull. And that's true of any real Kevlar or carbon fiber or even fiberglass boat. But Pete always referred to those scratches as the patina of use. And if we saw people come back with boats that had been out there for years and there were no scratches on it, well, we figured they bought themselves a boat that they haven't really used and that they need to get back out there and paddle more.
That's great. Who is the sort of, would you say, the typical Hornbeck paddler? Is there a typical Hornbeck paddler?
There's not well, we sell boats to a lot of different people. Some people want a small, light boat that starts at 15 pounds that they can get on top of their car by themselves and carry into the woods. And that could be, a fisherman that wants to get into a body of water to go catch themselves a brookie that nobody else has gotten to. And
Mm.
having a boat that weighs just 15, 16 pounds makes it a lot easier to do that. We do sell to a lot of women, especially older women, because it gives them the ability to lift the boats and carry it on top of their cars. We have actually there's a I've seen at least 4 or 5 women in their 80s who have come with Hornbecks, and they will drive. Typically, it's a Toyota Sienna minivan because it'll fit inside of that, so they can put their boat inside, not even have to worry about putting it on a rack. But we also sell longer boats, and so boats up to say 17 feet. And those will be boats that people will often buy to go into the boundary waters in Minnesota. The 14-foot new trick is used most very often for the Northern Forest Canoe Trail and paddling that.
Mhm.
So, when what started as a single little boat has grown into a great deal of boats. So there's not really any, specific person, but I would definitely say that more than half of our demographic is women.
Oh, wow. That's really interesting.
Yeah.
And I like how, it's actually ticks a lot of boxes, more maybe someone who's maybe newer to paddling,
Hmm.
or and people who are really experienced too. That's great. Let's talk about, first of all, you've got a great website, And
Oh, thank
let's
you.
give our listeners your URL so they can see what we're actually talking about if they want to.
I'd like to give a shout out to Andy Rasmus, who is on my staff at Hornbeck Boats and does a great job at keeping the website up to date and sprucing it up from
Yep.
time to time.
And what's the URL?
It's www.hornbeckboats.com.
That's great. And you're also on social media. I don't know if this person is also
Yeah.
doing all your reels and stuff, but you've got great stuff on Facebook and Instagram that demo the boats too. So listener, check them out on Instagram and Facebook as well. And I imagine on YouTube. And you have your own retail operation here in the Southern Adirondacks, and people can actually come and see the boats, but you actually let people demo them, right?
Sure, yeah. So we are building the boats in the same place they've always been built. They're what we lovingly refer to as Hornbeckistan. We're located, we're located maybe, I don't know, 100 yards from where the house is that Ann and Pete lived and my wife Lee grew up in. And just on the other side of the property, there's a shop and our store and multiple buildings that have, sprung up over the years as we've needed more space to build more and more boats. And we also have a pond on site, which Pete put in years ago. I believe Lee was 12 or 13-ish. So it's been in there for probably close to 40 years. And that pond was one of the great things that gave us the ability for people to try boats. So we do demos pretty much every day we're open that the pond is thawed. And we've had people come and, in the fall, sometimes the pond, will freeze over in the morning in the late fall. And then by 11 o'clock, it'll have thawed and people can pond. And I've had people come and sit up there at the pond and wait hours for the ice to go away so they could paddle a boat. And they waited too late in the season. And it's November and it's nearly Thanksgiving, but they want to paddle a boat.
Oh, that's great. Okay. That's great. We've mentioned Pete's name a lot so far. For those who might not know who he was, tell us about Pete Hornbeck as a person and as a craftsman.
Sure. He grew up just outside Buffalo in Hamburg. And when he was very fond of the Adirondacks. He studied it and read about it, really wanted to go to the Adirondacks. He really enjoyed camping and fishing. And once Ann and he were married, they packed up and their honeymoon was a camping trip. I heard stories from both sides where Pete enjoyed it and Ann did not. And then, and then they moved into their house there in the Adirondacks and really embraced it. So they were both school teachers, and he was teaching at Johnsburg. She was teaching at Minerva. And he just kind of, at his core, what Pete really was more than anything was he was a creative and he was an artist who worked in multiple mediums. Really, the boats were some of his early artwork. And as he got later into life, he still liked to design and build boats during the wintertime, but he focused a lot more on his watercolors and on his painting. He was he was really inspired by Winslow Homer and tried to, have works that kind of emulated that and had that look of there was typically water and trees and more often than not boats involved in his paintings. And to say, Pete, you should try something different. But he loved creating things and was always very proud of himself when he had. So it was never really the 10th boat or the 20th boat that he was interested in. It was always the first one.
Wow.
So we have an entire building that Pete lovingly referred to as the Museum of Failure, which has a bunch of plugs and molds and models and prototypes that didn't work out for one reason or another. And sometimes I'll break some of those out and use them from time to time. But he never designed his boats on paper. He always just did it while he was making it up as he went along. I think he'd have a vision in his head. This is what I want the boat to look like. and this is the length I want it to be. These are roughly the curves I want. And as he continued in the building of it, it would kind of take its own shape and its own life, very similar to the way that he would do a painting.
Wow.
Um,
That's very cool. Yeah, I love that idea, the Museum of Failure. There's so
yeah,
much written about the importance of failure. Brene
yeah,
Brown probably being the foremost authority on the topic, and even Teddy Roosevelt talking about the man in the arena.
yeah,
I've said this
for
before on
sure.
the podcast, but when our dad was teaching us to ski, he always said, if we fell down or we're frustrated, he said, if you're not falling down, you're not trying hard enough. And he
Yeah,
didn't mean that in like start from the top of the mountain, go straight
no, sure.
headlong down. But he said, you're gonna if you want to get better, you've got to challenge yourself more. And I think that's awesome. Talk about his values or philosophies and the impact they're still having on the company today.
So Pete's desire with the boats was always for them to be very usable and lightweight and not adding things that added cost and weight to those products. He didn't want them to be expensive out there. He didn't want them to be focused on the cosmetics of the boat or things of that nature, because those are the types of things that add weight to a boat and make a boat more expensive. So he was very minimalist. It was, what can I do to make the lightest boat that I can, that's going to function, that's going to be durable, and going to fit the needs of the paddler. And we still do that today. I mean, I mentioned earlier gel coats, which are a ooh, coating that you would spray into the mold before building the boat. And those can make a boat, that you can make a very pretty boat doing that. You can make greens and blues and reds and purples and all sorts of different colors, but you're adding weight and you're adding cost to the boat and doing that. We've always let, and this was always the way that Pete did it, we've always let the what seemed like the beauty of the composite itself show through. And when Pete got tired of looking at Kevlar all the time, he found another material to use for the outer layer to give it a different look, which is something that we do still. So, if somebody doesn't want a boat that's yellow, we can make one that looks kind of greenish. We can make one that looks kind of reddish, but it's not by adding anything. It's just by using a different version of Kevlar or adding a little bit of carbon fiber to that outer layer to kind of give it a little bit more of a characteristic. So his boats were always that minimalist. He didn't really want to add anything that added weight. A funny story, actually, early on in his boat building, he was building the boats out of Kevlar, the little yellow boats. And Anne, who was my mother-in-law, who was herself no shrinking violet, she was not afraid to say what she thought, came up to Peter and said, "You need to do something with those boats. They look like urine samples. Put a red stripe on them or something." So Pete, to just kind of antagonize her, took some red electrical tape and made a stripe on a boat and went, "Huh, I like the way that looks." And so that's where the red stripe was born. But that was even a little bit of he was not sure he wanted to do it because it was going to add, I don't know, a fraction of an ounce to the boat. But I'm glad that he did, because that's something that's very recognizable. So we still, kind of follow a lot of those things. We don't want to use a different material that's going to add weight to it. We don't want to, we've changed some processes in the way that the boats were built. We've kind of worked on improving some of the features. We've improved the seat. We've improved the backrest. We did add foot braces down the road to make it so the boats were more comfortable or more usable. But the boats are still kind of true to their heritage of what they were when Pete first designed each one of them.
Josh, how long have you been part of the company?
So I started, man, I think, my wife is an only child. And so I want to say it was probably around 2014 or 15 that Pete and I had a conversation, because there wasn't much of a succession plan
Mm.
with the business. And being that it's located there on the property that my wife as an only child was going to someday inherit, it was kind of okay, we need to figure out how we're going to do this or what we're going to do. So at that point, I kind of started to get more involved. Like Pete and I would, I have a business background, so he would ask me questions and I would, answer, and I would hang around and we would talk about things, and I'd kind of give him a little bit of advice from time to time. And then he'd talk to me about boat design, which was interesting. I worked in composites at another point, so it was kind of like, okay, I'm seeing this from a different angle.
Mm.
And then in that 2015 time period, I really started to kind of go up a little bit here and there. And as the years went on, I would go up more often, kind of work, every other Saturday during the season to sit up at the pond and talk to people and help people with demos and,
Where were you located?
educate them on the boats. My wife and I live in Wilton, just outside of Saratoga
Oh,
Springs.
okay.
So that's where we were at that point in time. And we're still there. We still live there. I commute up to the shop.
That's great. What was it like working for Pete? Any great anecdotes you'd like to share?
So I started full time as the title that Pete gave me was CEO. And I told him that title was too aggressive. And he said, "Well, I'm president for life, so you're CEO until I die." I said, "Okay." So I started full time in May of 2018 as the CEO of the business. And what I quickly learned was, Pete had told me, "I want you to come in. I want you to be in charge of everything. I'm going to semi-retire and focus on my paintings and having fun with my friends." And I said, "Okay, sounds great. I'll do that. I'm going to lean on you from time to time, asking questions, things." And what I quickly learned after being there was it wasn't really that Pete wanted me to take over the business at that point. He really just kind of wanted a shield between him and Anne, because she was the CFO of the business
Okay.
and she did the books. And so instead of Pete being the one where she would come over and give a hard time about spending money, it became me being the one that she would come over and give a hard
That
time.
is hilarious. I love that.
And so there were definitely some growing pains in the early years of Pete and I working together, but it was certainly an enjoyable experience, and I'm glad that I got to spend that few years with him side by side. His desk was literally right next to mine, almost an extension. Our chairs sat right next to each other as we sit there and talk to people.
That's amazing. I know Anne recently passed, or we're so sorry to
Yeah,
hear that.
thank you.
And they weren't just partners in life. She had a significant impact on the business, beyond just that she was
Oh,
CFO. Tell us about her.
yeah. I mean, the business wouldn't be here today if it weren't for that. Pete was the creative that really had the ideas and wanted to do the things, but Anne was was much more pragmatic and much more, okay, well, we can't do all those things right now, Pete. We need to take our time in doing some of those things. We need to be able to afford to do those things and plan ahead. And she if would make sure that the bills were paid and make sure that everything was functioning as it should over there. And they had a fair amount of friction between the two of them for doing that, because Pete wanted to spend all the money, and Anne wanted to continue living in the house uh, and affording it. So it was a struggle, because for years and years it was, when Pete had a heart attack in 92,
Mm.
91, 92, somewhere around there, and he retired from teaching and decided to boat build full time. But the business, you know, lost money every year. So
Right.
that's not a good way to stay in life. So it was really Anne that helped continue on everything and kept it funded. They were 50-50 partners in the shares of the business. And she really, she had a lot of good business ideas and ways to, be successful. And he would often, turn a deaf ear to them. So she would a lot of times find a man that they knew and say, "I need you to tell Peter this." And Peter would go give that advice and he'd say, "Huh, that's a pretty good idea.
Oh
I
boy.
like that." And so a lot of times she would kind of manipulate things from behind the scenes. She would do it with me as well. I was a pawn early on, but it worked. And it turned into, Pete was not a businessman, and he created this successful business almost in spite of that, just because of how gregarious he was and people liked him, and he was a storyteller, and he had these great ideas for these boats.
Mm.
more designs that would come out and fit more people and be useful in other ways. And a lot of times he'd have an idea for a boat, and Anne would say, "That's crazy, but go ahead and try it." And so we've got all these weird boats that are built around there. And he would come back a lot of times and be like, "Well, maybe you were right." So um, they were a very good pair. And then when he passed in 2020, she became my full-time boss, and I was no longer the in-between. So now I was the one that was just going to take the brunt of everything from both sides, or all of it. So, but it was great. We had a great relationship, and she was a very good. I mean, she was a proponent of a lot of the changes I was making and the things I was doing to try and bring the business a little bit more into the modern day from where it was.
Can you talk about that a little bit more? What aspects of Pete's vision are you committed to preserving, and sort of what are you opportunities you see for new direction?
Sure. I mean, I'm committed to the boats as the boats have been built with, I'm not looking to drastically take and completely redo what it is into something different.
Sure.
Incremental improvements or things of that nature, tweaks here and there are certainly things that we do. What I was interested in doing, and was a bit of a struggle when I first came on board, was improving some of the processes in the way that
Mm.
we built the boats. I would have conversations with Pete and say, why are we building the backrest this way? Well, because that's the way we've always done it. Well, do you think maybe we could build a jig and we could try this? No, because that's the way we've always done it.
Got it.
Okay. And so I would kind of secretly do one and then prove to him that it would be a good thing and that would work and it would be a little bit more efficient and make it easier for people who are doing the building. And then that he would buy in at that point. And it became easier as I had a couple of successes doing those sorts of things. But it was really just kind of, changes like that during the pandemic, when we had to shut down, we sent everybody home and I was the lone employee and we had inventory and I was driving things around, just delivering boats to people. But when we reopened, based on the amount of calls that I had been getting for the 2 months that we had to be closed there, I knew that it was going to be really busy and really hectic because people just wanted to get out of their houses and get outside.
Mm.
So, I talked to Pete, and at that point in time, demos were just, we opened at 9, we closed at 4, come on up. And I said, we need to do it differently. We need to come up with an appointment system where we can get a flow of people coming through and, be able to also have it so that it's safe for everybody. We can't just have a massive crowd of people.
Mm-hmm.
And he didn't necessarily like that idea. He didn't think it was going to work. And I said, Pete, let me, I leaned back into my days of when I would wait tables paying to, making money through grad school. I'm like, we're going to do it 3 times a day. We're going to have 3 demos, just like a dining room might do 3 seatings.
Right.
And we'll do one at 9, we'll do one at 11, and we'll do one at 1:30. And they'll last for 90 minutes and we can fit, maybe 5 or 6 people in each because they're going to come as couples and we'll keep everybody spaced out up in the pond and we're plenty of room. And he's like, I don't think so. It's not going to work. I said, okay, let me try it. And we said, okay, let's try it. And we tried it right as we reopened, and the appointments were all full for, weeks and weeks. They would just keep filling up. And he would spend time at the pond talking to people. And after about a month, he comes to me and he goes, we should never get rid of these appointments. And I said, really? He goes, well, he's like, there are the days that I'm up there all day when it was the old way. And we would just keep talking to people and people had to wait a long time or, wouldn't get their questions
Exactly.
answered. And I'm up there all day. And he goes, this is working really well for me. It's working really well for everybody up there. Said, great. I'm glad that you really like it. I like it too. Let's keep it. And we still do that today. Do our demos that way. Now we're a little bit more flexible. If you come on a, Thursday in September and we're not that busy, well, we can go up at 10:30 if there's nothing else going on. But, we still try to keep everything kind of organized that way. And because we just found it's a better experience for us, but also for the customers. We'd have people that had
Sure.
come, before and purchased boats, would come with a friend and they would tell us, I really like this way much more. Like, great, glad that you do.
I mean, yeah, I would have if I had been Pete, I would have greenlit that immediately. It's like, I don't like restaurants that don't take reservations. Like, I don't want to wait at the bar for an hour and a half to be seated. And
Yeah, yeah,
then with my marketing hat on, now you have people's information. You know who are coming in, you know how many times they've been, you can put,
yeah,
have that
yeah.
that customer info that can help fuel other decision making.
I think at the core, the reason Pete was hesitant to many of these changes is because, he had worked so hard for so many years to build Hornbeck boats. And it was his project. It was his second child after my wife. And
Mm-hmm.
it really, he felt like the business itself, the way that it was, really embodied him.
Right.
Here I come, you know, making changes to those things. And, for him to be defensive and not want to make those changes, I can completely understand where he came from. And I probably came in a little too aggressive in a lot of it when I was trying to do things. And there was definitely a learning curve where he and I had to learn how to work together, but we had a great relationship.
That's
And it
great.
really, it definitely changed over time. And he began to trust me more and more with what I was doing. And I would, go to him for feedback. And sometimes I would come to with an idea and he'd be like, I don't think I like that. Here's why I don't think I like that, but we can talk about it. And I listen, it evolved over time. It became easier for both of us to do the things to improve everything.
Sure. That's awesome. You talked about
Yeah.
demand growing during the pandemic. What about after the
Yeah.
pandemic? Are you seeing customer demand for paddling or the community changing much recently?
It's been, I mean, during the pandemic, 21 or 2020, 2021, 2022, people's lifestyles were very different
Mhm.
because you had a lot more spare time. Most people had, more money on hand, whether it was money that the government was doing to keep the economy going or handing down, whether it was, for you're not going out to dinner as often. You're not necessarily able to take your vacations. Many of us, we no longer had to pay daycare. I mean,
Right.
that came with its own struggles of having to parent two
Right.
children while both working. But so a lot of people had more expendable income.
Mhm.
And during that time, it was more expendable income and more time to do things and less things that you were able to do. There weren't concerts. You weren't really able to take vacations or cruises or do, big things like that. So people looked more towards the outdoors and, a whole lot of outdoor sporting goods really saw a spike during that time period. Bikes and campers
Pickleball.
and motorboats, pickleball, jet skis, and also a lot of people, that weren't really into those things, put a lot of money into their houses. So there were a lot more pools going in and
Right.
additions and things of that nature, right? So it was just kind of it seemed that there were a couple different ways that people would deal with this. The world is very different. I can't do the things that I've been normally doing or would normally do. I'm finding another route. And many of the people that were buying the sporting goods, there were some newcomers to it. Typically the newcomers weren't going to be up in, were a higher price than what most beginners will pay. But there were people that, had paddled before and it's, I don't feel like dragging my heavy boat out anymore. So I want to do it more often. Let's get a lighter one and they had that freedom. So we really saw a few years of just a giant growth in sales. We had, kind of in 21, we had doubled what we had done 5 years earlier. And then things have kind of slowly settled back down. Last year seems to be where the kind of the bottom of the settling down, and we seem to be slowly kind of coming back up this year. There's a lot of uncertainty in what's going on in the world and markets, though. Tariffs are definitely affecting some of the boats from outside of the US. We use I mean, our materials, Kevlar is made in the US. The resin we're using is made in the US. Most of what we're using, the wood that we use on our boats comes from, Pennsylvania. So pretty much most of the raw materials we use, we're lucky on this,
Mhm.
are U.S. materials. Now the prices of them have gone up, but not as exponential as you might see. So there's still demand, and there's still some kind of we're into a little bit of an upward trending, I think. And the paddle sports industry is definitely looking forward to and hopeful to 26, because they think 24 was kind of a course correction, and then 25 is kind of getting back to normal where things were pre-pandemic. So we're kind of hoping that that trend continues.
Do you sell most of your boats within the U.S. or do people order them from other parts of the world?
We we do have some boats that we have shipped overseas. We have a couple in Australia. We have one in New Zealand. There's a few boats in Europe. I don't know about the other continents. But we have them throughout the US and in the Pacific Northwest. They were very popular. But then, shipping is the hardest thing to accomplish with
Mm,
something like this.
sure.
You're taking something that's 10 and a half feet long or longer, that's, 25 to 30 inches wide and weighs 15 to 20 pounds.
That's amazing.
So,
Right.
so it's tough to, you can't just, throw it in a cardboard box and send it off like something from Amazon. So when we shipped in those days, we would build a crate, which would weigh significantly more than the boat.
Mm,
So, we would build kind of an open crate. It kind of looked like a skeleton around the boat, encapsulating the boat, which worked for a while. And we would ship, we have to ship less than truckload. So we usually get 5 or 6 boats together that were going to various places. And the truck would come and pick them up and they'd go to their depots. But then we ran into a series of mishaps with
mm,
that freight company that we were using. And that was the first freight company we had we were successful with. So we stopped shipping. Now we have, there's people that we work with who, just, this is what they do, is they deliver boats and they
mm.
drive. And then maybe they'll just be taking a trip and they'll say, well, I can fit two on top of my car. Or sometimes it's I'm pulling a trailer and I can take boats. But that's what we're using these days. So it's independent shippers. That's the biggest impediment to our boats going elsewhere. People are willing to drive to the Adirondacks and visit. People will come from all over. Will come from Florida. Will come from Ohio. Will drive down from Maine to come spend time in the Adirondacks and spend time with us and pick up boats while they're there.
Any good
But we
stories
no
from
longer,
that? Any good stories from that? People, who's come the farthest, do you
yeah.
think, to buy a boat?
So I've had people drive. I've had people drive from North Dakota during the pandemic, very early on, when I was really the only employee and all my guys were at home on paid leave. I got a call one day from a guy that worked out in Minnesota, and he lived in the town of Winona, Minnesota. And he called me and he said, "I want to buy a Hornbeck." And I said, "Cool. Where are you calling me from?" And he said, "I'm calling you from Winona, Minnesota." I said, "You know that there's somebody in your backyard that builds Kevlar boats, right?" And he said, "Yes, but I don't want one of theirs. I want a Hornbeck." I said, "Okay." And so we talked about it, and he drove straight from Winona, Minnesota to the Adirondacks, slept in his truck overnight because there were no campgrounds open. There was nothing of that nature. Picked up his boat and drove back to Minnesota. Slept in his car at a rest stop and got back to it again. And I know now from experience that it's about an 18-hour drive.
Yes.
And so he turned it around in 2 days, like 2, 3 days, 36 hours of driving so he could get himself his 14-foot Hornbeck new trick. But we've had people that have flown in from Florida just to demo boats
Wow.
and then order something, fly back, and have one of our guys that does the deliveries bring it down to them. Yeah, so it's certainly pretty cool when people are willing to travel great distances to come get your
Your product.
your product. Yeah,
Yeah,
come
for
visit your
sure.
business,
Exactly.
experience it. Yeah.
Well, you bringing up Minnesota, you are bringing
Hmm.
your products to Minnesota, which is one of the reasons why you're calling from a rest stop today. You're making that 18-hour
Yes,
trip
I am.
from
I am.
yeah,
I have
you're
a
yeah.
trailer behind me with about a dozen boats on it. Yeah, like when Hornbeck Boats at its our place there in the Adirondacks, more than anything, what I realized when I first, got involved is that yes, we sell boats there, but we're a manufacturer more than we're a retail store. We devote more of our labor and efforts into our manufacturing, into our building of boats than we do. And Pete, that was the part of it that he really loved, was the building of them. Now, clearly, you need to sell boats in order to keep building boats. But during COVID, when we had those years of sales drastically increasing and we were, had to change kind of the way we were doing it, things a little bit, we realized, hey, we can build significantly more boats than we do now without changing a lot of what we are and who we are, and without changing the business significantly, you know? And so then it was, okay, well, if we can build more boats and there's more people out there that want to buy the boats, let's find a way to make that happen. Shipping is the hardest thing to accomplish. What if we bundle and we ship them together? What if you're doing 8, 10, 12, 15 boats at a time? Well, that's going to drastically reduce the cost, and you can make sure that they're safe and that they're getting to where they're going. So for us, the East Coast has always been an easy place to ship the boats. We have people that can go up and down I-95 and deliver boats from Maine to Florida. It was heading west that was more of a kind of a roadblock for us. And I knew that there were people that would like our boats out in a different area. So my wife and I spent some time, we spent a couple of years just trying to figure out, okay, where are we going to? And so we wanted to go out and explore the Midwest. And we've been to, there's a big event every year in Madison, Wisconsin called Canoe-Copia, put on by a paddle sports store there. And it's a huge event. Thousands of people come to it just to buy stuff in paddle sports. And we went there in 22, the first year that it happened post-COVID. And a whole lot of people who had never met us before came to us and bought boats.
Wow.
And I said, wow. All right. The Midwest is going to work. Where now? And so then we just started kind of exploring in that area. And I really like the Madison area, but there's already a fair amount of, paddle sports retailers covering that market. So I looked a little further west and thought, let's look towards Minnesota, the land of 10,000 lakes, right? So the more time I spent exploring Minnesota, the more I felt that there were some significant commonalities between that area and the Adirondacks.
Mm-hmm.
So I took multiple visits out there myself, looking for spaces. And it's tricky because you need to find a space that fits your needs. Like, we couldn't find a space that had water, but I can find a space that's on the first floor, has an exit to the outside, has parking and areas so that we can put boats on cars and install roof racks and things of that nature. And my wife and kids came out last summer with me as well. And we went and we looked at a few places, and there was one space that, we really spent a significant amount of time in it. We were like, I really like this space. And it's 16-foot tall ceilings and big open space. And it was really like, this could just, it's on the first floor. It's right near a loading zone that we're allowed to use for cars to park there for us to, it was like, this is it. So we got that space, and starting this year, we started really working on kind of getting it to what we wanted to. So we put in a lot of hard work. Multiple, employees from here traveled out there to help me get this store set up. And the Saturday of Easter weekend, we had our grand opening. And we picked that day, although it seems like it might be a weird day, but that was when everybody from my family could be there. My kids were off from school, so both boys were able to fly out. My wife was able to fly out, and we were able to bring Ann Hornbeck out there as well. So she got to see, kind of what the next step in the business was. And, prior to that, she didn't really seem to she wasn't necessarily for it, but she was for me doing, what I thought was best. But once she was there, she kind of, got it. Okay, you are really just opening a Hornbeck Boats dealership.
Hmm.
And, we offer other things in there. We have other boats in there as well. But I mean, our prize jewel when you walk in the door is you see Hornbecks hanging vertically as you walk in the front doors.
Mm.
So it's been a big undertaking. I do have, I have two full-time employees out there. And, as of right now, the main way boats get back and forth is I drive out there pulling a trailer load of boats. I hope that eventually we get to the point where, the growth is enough that we can, maybe hire a truck from time to time to take out more boats at a time. We would need to find more room for storage, but that's a good problem to have.
Sure.
But yeah, so it's been a big undertaking there. It's going, it's growing. It's educating people on these boats. Our demos have been very highly attended, and we've sold quite a few boats out there. And as more and more people paddle them and try them and see other people using them, I think that they'll spread and grow much the way they did in the Adirondacks. And that then we could have kind of these two clusters of, areas where the Adirondack pack boat has now reached the boundary waters.
Yeah.
And it's been pretty cool to see. And many of some of the first people that bought boats out there from us come back to the store from time to time and talk to us about how much they love it and how it's totally been a game changer for them in their, solo paddling out there. And it's pretty cool. And the other thing that's happened is because now we have this second anchor, so to speak, is, just like we experience people here being willing to drive 4, 6, 8, 12 hours to come get a boat. People out there are doing it as well. So we've
That's
had people
amazing.
come from, people are coming from Wisconsin, people are coming from Iowa.
Kansas
We had a
City.
couple from Colorado,
Yeah.
Kansas City. Yeah. So we'll, I think as we spend more time there and a Hornbeck West or a Hornbeck Midwest,
Midwest.
that really is really I mean, west from the Adirondacks, but is really a jewel for us and helps us to create, kind of more for our children. Should they decide that, my sons Rushton and Devlin, should they decide they want to get into the boat. So they both work with me somewhat. Rushton is able to do more. He's a little older. He'll be 16 next month. So he comes up and he makes backrests and he, builds things around the shop. And Devlin is 13 and he comes up and we were at an event on Saturday that I was at an offsite event, and he comes with me and he talks about the boats and talks to customers and tells them about it. And he's kind of like a little salesman. So it's a fun little family
I
adventure.
just, I have to ask,
Sure.
uh, their names. Is
So
Devlin Art Devlin from Lake Placid, or is that okay? Sorry.
no,
All right, so we
no,
don't
it
even
was
have to
just
talk about this,
no,
but
no, that's all right. I was years ago when I was in a different role in a different composite job. I had a customer and my contact there, his name was Devlin, and Lee's like, "Oh, I really like that name." And I said,
that's
"Oh,
neat.
okay." So that's
Uh,
what it is. And Rushton is obviously named for John Henry Rushton.
Exactly. Exactly. That
Yeah.
is so cool.
Yeah.
So, I know you're just into it, this new venture in your first year, but how do you feel it's going so far?
It's going pretty well. We're finding that, you know, out here in the Adirondacks, the the best selling boat for us has always been the Lost Pond or the 10.5 foot classic, with the 12 foot being right there next to it, almost neck and neck. And out in Minnesota, we're finding that everything goes a little bit longer.
Hmm.
So we haven't done many of the 10s, but the 12s have been really popular and the 14s have been really popular. And so that's something that was a little bit different for us, which is pretty cool. The other thing that we're finding is there was an entire market out there that, I hadn't even really considered, that we're really seeing a lot of movement with, which is duck hunting.
Oh, wow.
Now, we've had there's the occasional duck hunter that has come to Hornbeck Boats and has bought a boat for that, but nothing to the likes of what we're experiencing out there right now, especially right now because they're about to head into season on it. So, one of my employees, Eli, last month found this event that we went to called Game Fair, which is this big, uh, you know, show for the consumer, just to the average person to go and they buy decoys there, or they watch dog competitions and retrievers and things of that nature. And behind us there was this booth that was there were real artists making decoys, but they're making decoys not just, this is your simple, plastic decoy. They were really crafting them in very, whether it was wood that they were, you know, sculpting down, or there were wireframe and then canvas that they were building and painting. And so they were really a great booth to watch. And there were four guys there doing it. And the first weekend, it was 2 weekends. The first weekend, one of the gentlemen came over and he bought a boat from us.
Oh,
And
wow.
so he picked it up later that week and he used it before the next weekend. He was very excited about it. And he told the guys there about it. And then another one came over and bought a boat from us. And then another one came over and bought a boat from us. And then the fourth one was like, well, I'm going to think about it. Maybe I'll come out and demo. I got a call on Saturday from Eli as he was doing a demo out there at Lake Nokomis. He's like, well, he came and he bought a boat. You need to
There you
bring it out
go.
with you. And I said, okay, there it is. So I think that as more, and it was our first time being there. And the majority of people that are coming to that show are just, they're not coming thinking, hey, I'm going to spend, a couple $1,000s on a new boat. They're just there looking, getting some smaller things and things of that nature. But there was a lot of interest, and we've gotten a lot of calls from many of those people since then. So I think, one of the things, and Eli is a duck hunter, and he's like, I can't believe I didn't think about that. He knew that he was going to use it for that, but this was really our way to. So we're thinking of, what can we do to, you know, change the boat without changing it much to really make it so that it's specialized for that duck hunter. And
Mm.
we've got some ideas. We had about a decade or so ago, there was an employee here in the Adirondacks, Justin, who was an avid fly fisherman, and he said, well, what if we take that yellow boat and we build a fishing package where we change it a little bit and make it more towards, what people that want to fish from it would see. And that was a huge success. So I'm hoping
Mm.
that Eli, having his insights, can help me on this one so that we can kind of create a boat that's really specialized for that market out there and then see where it goes.
Yeah, you could. I got a name for you, the horn duck.
Oh, I like it.
I got a million dollar idea. I'm just kidding. This has been so interesting, and then I'm not a big paddler, and that's an
Okay.
understatement. But now I'm like, because I the kayak thing, I don't like the enclosed part of it, but I think I might have to get out
No,
and come see you guys and do a
you
demo.
should come by and we'll
I'd
put you in the
love that.
boat
I'd
and
love
see how
that.
you like it.
But this show isn't just about me. What do you hope people feel
Sure.
about Hornbecks, or how they feel when they actually slip a Hornbeck into the water?
I mean, I think with a Hornbeck, and I feel this is kind of one of the things that separates it from other boats, is the experience starts before the water. The experience really starts with, getting your boat to the water. One of the biggest things that I think holds a lot of people back from paddling is that, boats can be heavy and they can be cumbersome. It can be difficult to get them onto your car. And then once you get to your car to wherever you're going, you have to get the boat to the water. And maybe you're strapping on our wheels or you're trying to carry it. And with our boats, they really, one of the things that I hear the most from people is the word freedom, because it gives them the freedom and the independence to be able to do it
Mm.
themselves. And if it's not such a cumbersome thing, many of these people have been paddling for years, but not that much. And they'll talk to us after they've bought their boat and say, I've paddled more this summer than I have in a long, long time because of how much more approachable you made it, being able to get to the water and just, it's not, okay, oh, I've got some time. I think I'm going to go paddling. Oh, I don't really want to tie that heavy boat on top. It's not that. It's I can have it on top of my car and be at the water and not have to, fight with it. And then once you're in the water, it's just peaceful,
Right. I
So
love that.
you can get to the bodies of water that not a lot of other people are at because they're harder to get to, and that makes a big difference for a lot of people. So I think, the freedom and independence is one of the big things, but also the peacefulness that comes with it when you're often at places where there's not a lot of other people.
That's very cool. Josh, this has been such a great conversation today. Thank you so much. But before we release you into the wild or
Yeah, no, it's
back
been great to
on,
be here. Thank you.
well, sitting in a truck stock talking to us over Zoom, I don't know about that, but
Back on the road.
before we release you back, exactly, before we release you onto the highway, we always like to end with a fun question for our guests. The Adirondacks are full of hidden
Sure.
gems, everything from great ice cream stands and farm markets
Yeah.
and general stores to epic waterfalls and the historic great camps. So for you, when friends or family come to visit, what's the one place you tell them they have to experience? And it could be anything, whether it's a hiking trail or a local brewery, or even just a spot that you sneak away to for peace and quiet. What's your hidden gem?
One of the places that I always come back to, and when somebody is at the store and they want to, we're somewhere nearby that we can take our boats and play around with them now that we have them, is 13th Lake in North River. And it's not really like, it's not hidden. There's a parking lot, there's plenty of campsites. Many of the campsites are ones that people, can pull their wagons to and set up encampments. But when my children were young and they wanted to go canoe camping, and in my family, you paddle your own boat. We're not
Mm.
we're not taking tandems. So, when my kids were 5, 6 years old and they'd want to go paddling and they'd be in their little boat, we'd go to 13th Lake because there's a few campsites if you paddle out that you can get to and you're by yourself. You're not near where everybody else is at the lower sites there near the parking lot. And I don't know, I just have these fond memories of being at this one particular campsite. It's kind of, you get there, it's up above the water, so you kind of will beach and then you have to kind of walk up a little bit to get to it. And I remember being there, and I'm not from the Adirondacks. I have been pulled into it and just kind of embraced it over time. But I remember my first night there, I'd taken both of my sons, and man, they were probably 8 and 5 or 8 and 6, 8 and 6. And we were in the tent. We roasted marshmallows. We'd done our thing, and we're hanging out in the tent. And a sound from outside scared my younger son, and he's like, "What was that?" I was like, "I think that's a loon." And it was my first time hearing loons in the wilderness.
Wow.
Was us in that, and they were just all night. And it was, it had frightened him at first, but once he knew what it was, we climbed out. We kind of went onto the ledge at that campsite and listened for it. So it's always had a really, I've always had a real fondness for 13th Lake. It's been a few years since I've been there, but it was always a place that I really loved going with my kids. And I think it's a place that's approachable for a lot of people because it's not that far to the beach. So even if you don't have a Hornbeck, you can probably go experience it.
Yeah.
And it's motorless. They're less small
Yes.
electric trolling motors, but it's a nice calm until the evening when the wind starts blowing into your face. But other than that, it's a great place to go.
That's great. People haven't mentioned that before. 13th Lake, listener, is actually not too far from Gore Mountain. So usually when Steve's
Right.
here, he's the GPS system, but I know exactly where that is. North Rivers, north of North Creek. There's also a lot of great whitewater rafting in that area too.
Yeah, you're just off
and
the Hudson, yeah.
It's not only are those campings and the campsites and the beach accessible, it's not that far off the Adirondack Northway too. So it's
easy to get
it's
to.
easy to get to. Is it a state camp? Are these campsites run by the state, or is it?
Yes.
Got it.
Yes, it's a state campground.
That's great.
Yes, it's a state campground, but it's not it's a first come, first serve campground. It's not you can't make reservations.
Got it.
But
Neat.
in
How
the
special.
6 or 7 times that I've paddled out to those sites, I've never encountered anybody else on them.
That's
So
awesome.
I've always been able to get a site.
That's amazing. Josh, it's been so great to have you on the podcast. We would love to have you back in the spring. Maybe we can do a session on getting started with paddling and pick you or your brains or anybody on your team's brains about it. But thank you so much for sharing all this great information and your stories of Pete and Ann and the incredible, not just business, but experience they've helped create for paddlers everywhere.
Well, thank you for having me. It's been a lot of fun. I've really enjoyed it, and I'd love to come back on in the spring if you'll have me.
Definitely. All right, take care and have safe travels.
Thanks.
I know we say this at the end of every podcast, but that was really interesting. Listeners, thank you for joining us on 80K Talks. Stories like today's just remind us that the Adirondacks aren't just a place. They're a legacy carried forward by the people who live here, work, and dream of big things. If this episode moved you, please rate and review us so more listeners can discover these voices in this region that we love so well. For more Adirondack stories and insights, visit 80ktaste.com and subscribe to our newsletter. Until we meet again, may the water stay calm, the trails inviting, and the Adirondacks always close to your heart. See you next time.